Well met, lords and ladies, Jacob Butter speaking, and a warm welcome to this week's Walking Wednesday. And yeah, this one particularly okay. I say not lots happened this time, I suppose. I mean, I'm glad that February has been lighter in general to some degree. Not that nothing else has happened at all. I did actually submit a video request to join the language assistance thing, but not the same one as before. I have to email them about an interview. Actually, I just saw the email from them, so I will do that as soon as I've got back home and finished eating. But yeah, aside from that, you know, suppose that's all of the veggies eaten to get on to dessert, so to speak. Because yeah, the rest of it's been almost a repeat of, you know, last week in terms of, okay, well, here's the same, you know, the series that we're covering, that we're reviewing, which, you know, have caused either excitement or lack thereof, depending on who you ask specifically. So yeah, not much to say that is different, aside from one particular thing, and it's probably the title of this video, and that is that we went to watch Avatar: Fire and Ash a couple days ago, and yeah, I would, of course, you know, I do want to dedicate, you know, my thoughts to, you know, I'm going to dedicate this video to my thoughts on the subject. Sorry, I'm mumbling. But so I guess that's what will happen. So, but I'm probably not going to do like a full breakdown, you know, because I still remember the Across the Spider-Verse review and how that took, you know, over an hour. Not to mention I only have 46 minutes of storage left on here for the time being. So, you know, I'll and I know that it's I think we might have seen like the last you know, run of it in theaters, actually, because it's been out for quite some time. It's been out since last year, which honestly makes sense. I do remember that when Way of Water came out, they did actually say they needed to be the third highest grossing film of all time just to break even. So no wonder they want to keep it in the cinemas for as long as possible. In fact, if I can recall, the first Avatar movie was also fairly similar in that department in terms of having a very extended runtime in theaters. Maybe it just felt that way. Not to say that I actually ever saw that one in theaters. Unfortunately, I didn't. Well, I mean, I said unfortunately. I was 9 when it came out, so I would not have been allowed to see it in theaters legally at the time. So yeah, that would just never have happened. I think the first time I watched it was, although now I say that, I guess, now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure I did actually watch it at some other point on, you know, on DVD, I think it was, after, you know, but before I turned 12. I think it was rated 12, so yeah. Because like I said before about the Avatar, well, the Avatar movie in general was because what was that, you know, as much as people do say, you know, rightfully so, it became a sensation, because obviously that's why it was the highest grossing film of all time for ages, until I think Avengers Endgame, unless you adjust for inflation, in which case Gone with the Wind is still up there for some unknown reason, you know. I guess it's kind of the reverse. People say that the Avatar phenomenon was overhyped in 2009, and I say that the Gone with the Wind phenomenon was overhyped in 1939. But then again, I think that one also had extended theatrical releases because, you know, it was right around, you know, right around the cusp of, you know, of World War II. So I don't think they were making many other movies on that scale at the time. In fact, a lot of the film stuff that was made at the time was propaganda, so I guess I can get it to that extent. Yeah, in terms of Avatar, obviously, you know, no such no such geopolitics, thankfully, of that nature. It was more just a case of, it seems to be the spectacle of it all that people seem to really appreciate, and that's why it's been criticized a lot for its story, or, perceived lack thereof in recent years. I think I mentioned this when I talked about Way of Water a couple of years ago, but I remember Leon Tarkshina particularly. I guess he was kind of parroting what a lot of what a lot of other people were starting to say on the internet, which was that quote one thing from Avatar, quote one line, or name one character. You can't. And it's like, what? Yes, I can, Leon. What are you talking about? Because going back to the idea that it was a phenomenon that I was, actively a part of. We had a whole extended make-believe series that we were doing in primary school. Just surrounding the idea of Avatar. At first, it was still on Pandora. Then we went into a different planet that was just. I guess Pandora's a moon, isn't it? But we went on to we went to a different moon / planet, or celestial body in general, and and we continued there because I happened to have found an interesting idea in terms of hypothetical world building in a page of Reportero Doc, which to anyone who was around in Spain at the time probably just had a wave of nostalgia on them. I don't know if they still make those magazines, Reportero Doc, because magazines, of course, in general have fallen out of fashion. So I don't really know, actually. But yeah, what was I going to say? But yeah, so we were really excited by it. As he said, that it was a contender for a favorite movie, or it was my favorite movie. So that's that was that, and I think probably still is. Don't about the sequels. Haven't really discussed the subject at the moment. I guess I'm doing that now, technically speaking. So yeah, the other major thing is that the story of the first Avatar movie, that people have said follows a lot of the same story beats as several other stories of old, actually, and there is definitely some truth to that. I can't really say that I can't really claim to have seen a lot of the movies that people claim are of a similar plot to Avatar. In fact, actually, in fact, actually, this kind of reminds me of the situation of Cars versus Doc Hollywood, where I haven't seen Doc Hollywood, but people have synopsized that one. I'm skeptical when the internet claims that kind of thing because of the whole Simba versus Kimba the White Lion thing that was very thoroughly disproven. So who's to say, really? But it's not like the story, when you get down to its bare bones, it's not like the actual premise of the first Avatar movie is exactly super original, and people have pointed out that it does fall into the white savior trope, and I'm pretty sure they kind of addressed that, or not really addressed it, but I guess responded accordingly for the sequels, presuming, of course, that the sequels were not already planned from the beginning, which they might have been, because in this particular instance, despite the fact that nearly 2 decades passed since the not even 2 decades, it was like 14 years have passed since the original one, so a decade and a half had passed between Way of Water and just plain Avatar. So it's not impossible for that to have happened, but it does definitely seem like, so I'm just crossing the road. It does definitely seem like, you know, there's, given that Jake is not as much of a protagonist at this point, I think that's probably on purpose. I mean, there is, you know, he's still a protagonist in certain points, but, you know, Way of Water definitely expanded it to, there are like several things going on with you know, multiple of the Sully kids. Maybe except Took, actually. Took doesn't really do much at the moment. So I imagine that, you know, if they're going to do, I think they had like, you know, 5 movies planned, so if the remaining 2 end up happening, I guess that Took is going to be a little bit more involved, let's say. Because yeah, that would just make the most sense. But yeah, Way of Water, I guess, you know, that definitely, to me, I feel like Way of Water felt like what people feel like the original Avatar felt like, in terms of, you know, there was a lot of spectacle, particularly because of the underwater effects, the fact that the technology existed to make it in the first place. You know, the reports of a new world record being broken for longest time holding the breath underwater. I forget the actress's name in question. I know that the previous record holder was Tom Cruise. So, you know, there's all of that fanfare, and I suppose just the general idea of somebody. What was I going to say? The general fanfare of no, that was it. Just that, but versus how the story actually continued, in terms of like the first Avatar. It felt like, you know, they said, oh yeah, I think they said the Sky People left forever or something, and they clearly didn't, because a lot of the same people came back sometime later, just, you know, with reinforcements and backup, and they decided to, instead of going after Unobtainium, they went after Amoritum. You know, another thing they probably addressed in terms of criticism, because, you know, Unobtainium, even though it was a term used since the 1950s, people feel like that's, you know, a very unoriginal name, which I suppose it technically is because of its repeated usage. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna go back this way. So yeah, a lot of that happened. So what about Fire and Ash then? You know, because, you know, Way of Water extended the cast. It did what sequels do. It expanded the universe, because, you know, it was implied in the original that, you know, if they waited any longer, they would have rallied up, you know, 10 times the amount of tribes as they did in the original. So there is definitely an idea there's more to explore, and I'm glad there's more to explore on Pandora, because that was the major selling point for me, because yeah, like, you know, when you get down to it, you know, it's not like I was exactly, you know, thinking about film effects or, you know, spectacle or 3D or any of that stuff, and I saw it in 2D anyway on a small screen. So what definitely appealed to me was, you know, was the sci-fi aspect of it, but also just, you know, the general ability of the characters and everything. You know, the ones that are still around. That's probably why they pull so many strings to get, you know, to get Grace back in reincarnated form as Kiri. I don't know, something along those lines. Yeah, the other thing, I guess. Yeah, the reason it felt like, well, sorry, I'm kind of collecting all my thoughts here. I'm very disjointed for some reason this week. I've just not been on my game in general. maybe it's because I just ruined your hours yesterday. It's probably not helping matters that much. But yeah, Fire and Ash, I feel like was, you know, the perfect marriage between the two different movies. You know, it's something I mentioned to my dad after we left the theatre, was that James Cameron got into filmmaking after watching Star Wars, which I guess, you know, when by that I mean Star Wars before it was renamed Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. I think it was that early on, pretty sure. So there's definitely, you know, a long history of, well, you know, being inspired by somebody who was pushing the medium of filmmaking, but also took a lot of inspiration from, you know, samurai movies of old that have now been lost to time. You know, a very simple good versus evil concept at first, and then complicated things later. I guess there's always the risk, you know, that if you go out of your way to, you know, introduce so many other complex ideas, that you just end up going the direction that Star Wars did, and, you know, alienating, ironically, some of the people who just you enjoyed the simpler things, because it's no longer as accessible when you're talking about, or when you're paralleling politics that are currently, you know, ongoing at the same time as the franchise is developing. That's why a lot of people had issue with the prequels in terms of, you know, them being boring and whatnot. Not that they're exclusively boring, of course, but, you know. So yeah, I think we are. Yeah, so Way of Water at the time felt like that kind of idea, in terms of like, oh, okay, of course they're back for a new thing, back for something else. Oh, there's so many other characters now, we're following along, you know, and the movies are already, you know, 3 hours long each, so, you know, you've got to be invested in more than just the spectacle to, you know, bypass that. And that's why Fire and Ash to me felt so, felt much better than Way of Water. It could be partly because, again, like I said, it's the perfect marriage for the two films, because of you know, some very subtle callbacks to the first movie, actually, and even some that I thought were going to happen but didn't. Like there's one particular time where I thought, you know, when a character, I'm not going to say who, I guess, was considered, you know, was about to be sacrificed by Jake, and he eventually stays his hand. And I thought to myself, oh, you know, are the seeds of the sacred tree going to appear, because we saw them earlier, and they're going to steady his hand, you know, the same way that, you know, they steadied Neytiri's hand so that she wouldn't, you know, shoot him in the face when they originally met. And that didn't happen. Jake stayed his hand by himself because of his, you know, pre-existing emotional attachment to that same character. And I think that's probably better. They didn't do that one, but one thing they did do is that same scene directly afterwards in the original, once, you know, Jake is begging to be taught by Neytiri, he asked, okay, well, if I'm such a nuisance and, you know, Sky people are terrible and whatnot, why did you not just kill me? And you could say maybe Neytiri might have been lying because, you know, the seeds were what stopped her. But she says the line, "You have a good heart, no fear." You know, so again, Leon, I can quote the first movie, actually, still to this day. And then in Fire and Ash, there's one scene where there's a new character talking to Quaritch. I forget this character's name. They say it like a couple of times, but I just kind of think of her as the Ash Sahik, because that's her main role. She appears a lot in the trailers for good reason as well. And you know, then so the scene where those two are talking, it seems like, you know, it seems like she's trying to, you know, put him under a truth spell of some kind, or is a drug-induced truth stupor, whatever you want to call it. Again, the ideas of you know, the ideas of religion and science blend a lot more in the Avatar franchise than they do anywhere else. You know, is Awa actually, you know, the great mother, or is she simply the operating system of the biggest neural network that has ever existed? You know, and there's no proper answer to that, because, you know, just like in real life, you know, there are unanswered questions in terms of, you know, the deities that we have either interpreted and or conceptualized depending on your beliefs on the subject. Yeah, so then so what was I saying? So it's on the truth stupor basically, and yeah, then she after Quaritch turns the tables on her and realizes, oh yes, you want an equal, you've overpowered so many other people. You know, she's going up against Awa as well, so already a huge power trip, but no one could equal her, no one could, I guess, team up in that case. And then at that point, she says, you have a strong heart, no fear. Or it could have even been good heart, no fear, and you never knows, it's same idea. And so not only does that like help in terms of, you know, Quaritch's parallels to Jake, but also this new Ash Sahik's parallels to Neytiri. Because that's another thing as well. Neytiri in Way of Water didn't have much to do. And that was a real shame. Because, you know, there are some characters that, you know, died in the first one that could have served a different purpose in the second one if they survived. Like Sute, for example, Neytiri's previous fiancé, who was supposed to be the next clan leader. If he'd survived, knowing now that in Way of Water Jake resigned his position as clan leader so that he could take his family and leave the Umatikaya, what if Sute actually had survived and he became the clan leader, and that became a source of tension, much like the tension this time with Neytiri after you know, after the death of her son, you know, the suffering of her family, and the possible idea that, you know, she hates the Sky People so much that, you know, even her own children, when she sees, like, you know, their hands, or, you know, with all 5 fingers or anything, does she see the demon blood inside them? I think at one point she does say yes, but she doesn't mean it, because there's an argument between her and Jake. Again, Neytiri's honesty comes into question at different times, but that's kind of the point, because of course it would, you know. In my head I just went, she's human, but no, she isn't. But the whole idea of Avatar is that the Na'vi are more human than the actual humans. So, you know, there's that too. So anyway, yeah, Neytiri didn't do much other than, you know, quite rightfully complain about the situation, push back against the idea of leaving the Umatikaya in general, butt heads with the new Sahik that's whose name I've forgotten, and also I believe, you know, lose her father's bow. It got broken, so, you know, there was not much that they gave her at that point. But in this movie, in Fire and Ash, they rectified that significantly. Not only with the foil to her, but the reason that that Ash Sahik is a foil to her is because not only does team up with Quaritch in that same way, and there's definitely some sort of tension. There's something going on there between them. That's, you know, unless that was all. I mean, that was, you know, he was on a truth spell, so that look in his eyes is all I'm saying. But yeah, the Ash Sahik and Neytiri are not a foils, but mainly because, like, how they approach things differently. You know, I've talked before about a character concept I call the Banquo, referring to Banquo from Macbeth, because, you know, he is the foil to Macbeth in the sense that he's presented with the exact same information as Macbeth, but takes a much more passive role on the subject. He doesn't have the same fatal flaw of ambition, so with the same scenario, he actually pursues an entirely different path, and one that I can't quite call less self-destructive, because, you know, he does, spoilers for a 400-year-old play, I guess, he does, in fact, you know, get shot and dies. But he doesn't take anyone down in the process, except for, I don't know, maybe some one of the assassins in different versions. I don't know. That depends. That's not specified. And of course, lets his son escape. But yeah. So what was I going to say? So when I call a character a Banquo, it's usually because they take the better path than the person they're representing. And in this case, Neytiri becomes the Banquo to Ash Sahik. Because the very first time we have a conversation with Neytiri, it's during a moment where she is singing a song of mourning for the son that died in the last movie, whose name I've forgotten. And, you know, Jake, you know, is somewhat, because he's also mourning, he sort of lashes out at her, and, you know, or not really lashes out, he more just kind of expresses, you know, passive aggression regarding Awa, being like, you know, all the stuff that we've lost, you know, everything here, where's Awa now? What has she done for us, basically? And then Neytiri retorts that, you know, she says, you know, I've lost my son, I've lost my home, I've lost my bow, I've lost, you know, my identity, basically. She doesn't say identity, but it's implied. And my faith is all that I have left. Which is true for a lot of people, you know. Even despite all of the things that happen to them in life, they cling on to faith because that's something that gives them hope, and that is ultimately the beauty of it. You know, it's if someone is, you know, able and willing to put their trust into a higher power, so that things, you know, may work out if they, you know, if they pursue the righteous path, then honestly, you know, that's something that I do envy, having that certainty and clarity of mind. So, you know, and the Avatar series in general is also is quite good at this idea, because, like I said before, it's not properly stated what Awa is. You get, you know, you get different perspectives on what she represents, but no one, because of course, no one has seen her directly. They're all unreliable narrators to some degree, because of course they are. So, so that aspect, so that I really appreciate, because, you know, I think it probably handles the subject matter a lot better than it potential to do. But yeah, back to Neytiri and Ash Sahik, because I keep rambling. You know, when we do get a moment where, I think it's the same scene with Quaritch, where she confesses like what happened to a tribe, and how a fire consumed most of them, and she was one of the only survivors. You know, her entire family burned, I think. So she decided to harness that, control fire, and then, you know, find a way to use Zahelu, the power that they have, you know, to connect to the neural network from their braids, to actually, you know, do some greater harm, and, you know, to disconnect from Awa. I was originally, when she said, like, where is your goddess now? I thought, isn't she the goddess of, like, everything on the planet? Because of the whole idea of, you know, the connections and biodiversity and everything. And the answer is, you know, well, somebody, just like some people will cling to faith when things go wrong in their life, others will actively denounce it and say, you know, why has this happened? You know, like it's kind of like Salieri, you know, in Amadeus, and possibly real life, depending on how you view that's the truthfulness behind that story. You know, he actively, once he realizes how, you know, innately talented Mozart was, or or, you know, very intricately trained, again, different interpretations, but from his perspective, how innately talented he was, being touched by the gods, you know? Amadeus means love of God, after all. So he declares God as his enemy, and, you know, decides to block him out, and, you know, and give in to, like, other temptations that have happened in the story, etc., etc., etc. So I guess, yeah, in that sense, Ashta Hayek is definitely kind of a Salieri as well. At least in that sense, where she took destiny into her own hands. And Salieri was quite successful in his own time. So, you know, she clearly... they said before the Raiders were getting much more bold, and they certainly were. You know, they were gaining ground. They had Taruk Maktoum himself, and under in several points, and his children, and, you know, again, they even took down Neytiri and had her, you know, be in even worse shape, because even with her injured arm, she couldn't even fire a bow. She had every right to, you know, decide to turn away, but still didn't, and that's why she's the Banquo to Ashta Hayek's Macbeth. And you know, and that was all done through the character who obviously, you know, when we meet meeting the character where that obviously mirrors Jake, because Quaritch and Jake, of course, have both by this point, you know, lost their human bodies, one by choice, one by, again, Neytiri. You know, Jake says several times he has a chance to connect to Pandora, to go through the path that he did. You know, marine to marine, that's what happened. They even got a moment where, because of Spider's existence, they actually have an attachment in common that comes up twice in the movie, one towards the beginning, once towards the end. You know, it's not a simple, you know, enemyship anymore. And of course, Quaritch still feels betrayed by, you know, what Jake thought, and, you know, the idea of his betrayal to his own kind, and, you know, he's embracing more his literal avatar. But still, of course, he said in the movie, I know what team I'm playing for. I still remember what team I'm playing for. So, of course, he teams up with the one Na'vi tribe that is actively against all of the others. So, you know, it works out quite beautifully. You know, going back to Star Wars, and why I mentioned that before, you know, the most famous George Lucas quote, I think, is, you know, it's like poetry, it rhymes, you know, or sort of they rhyme, because, you know, referring to the prequels and original trilogy, which at the time were the ones that were out. You know, there is that idea where there's a lot of parallels occurring like that with the first film, but also piggybacking off of what happened in the second one. You know, Paikon, the Tulkun, was still banished. Noak was still trying to not only redeem himself for that, but also lose another brother, which was covered in the first scene. Kiri still had seizures and trouble connecting with Awa, considering that she was, you know, so spiritually inclined, you know, that she had to do that. So yeah, Noak and Kiri particularly also took a lot of focus this time, and again, rightfully so. As much as we say that, you know, the movie definitely is an hour too long, and stuff could be trimmed, there's not a lot that I would remove. There is one bit that I would remove, which is the marine biologist, where, you know, he says like there's like random marine biologists who protest what they're doing because there's a big Tulkun gathering, and they're going to attack that because there's, you know, in the climax of the movie, because, you know, that's like a full year's quota of Amoritum in one go. Which, by the way, I'm so glad they're still doing the Amoritum thing and not just a different resource, because that would just get repetitive, you know, even more than it did in Way of Water. And the marine biologist protests. His protest is acknowledged, but of course, you know, in a classic science versus suits situation, they don't listen. So he ends up, at one point, Jake gets captured, he's going to be executed publicly, and this guy ends up coming in and saves him. And because he doesn't have much presence beforehand, we haven't seen him built up, and also Neytiri was herself flying around at the same time, that part felt like it was a little much. Maybe he's going to come back, because he survives the movie, so maybe he's going to come back at some point, and that's going to be, it's going to be another ally, but I don't know. We already have a lot of some allied Sky people like Norm, who's still around, who's also been, you know, sidelined, but he was also sidelined in the first movie anyway, so that also happens. Max, I do like how he is still kicking around and still fighting the good fight. Probably partly memory of Trudy as well. He's sort of like the William Donlow in like the latest Mission Impossible movie, where he comes back and it's like, oh yeah, that character is still there, and he's you know, had a whole journey that we weren't privy to, because spy movies, of course we weren't privy to it. We weren't to know. So yeah. What else? Forgot what else. Hold on. Need to focus on crossing here. Yeah, so I probably would have cut that out, because there was already a climax gearing up anyway with the Tulkun regardless. I don't think we needed Jake to be, you know, to give himself in at that point and then be captured only to escape and fight the same people anyway, because they're going to do the same thing. So yeah, I'd have removed that plot line, that whole section, and you know, that would have definitely helped. You know, that would have taken it probably under 3 hours. You know, psychologically, there's one thing that I know is that when it comes to YouTube videos, particularly, even if people see that a video is under, you know, is like under a certain like hour count by like a minute. Like, say for example, you know, they don't like watching 2-hour videos, but they'll look at 1 minute 59 and be like, oh, they're not 2 hours. So, same thing probably applies to movies, I imagine. But actually, conversely, there is a scene that I would have added to the movie. You know, just a small one. You know, or maybe not even like, maybe just added it on top of like a scene that already existed. Maybe. You know, the very first scene is Noak and his older brother, whose name I've forgotten, you know, flying around on their banshees, on their Ikran, and you know, it's revealed that he's, you know, underwater, he's connecting with him, you know, in under the influence of Ewa, much like the Sacred Tree would in other places. So. And that part there, it establishes that yes, he is still, of course he is, very much feeling guilty over what happened to his brother, and the idea that he blames himself for it. And of course, there's obviously the scene where Jake says the same thing, that, you know, if he didn't abandon his post and go off on his own and go rogue and everything and try to prove himself, you know, his brother would still be there. He stops himself just in time, because classic argument, you know, it was bound to happen, and Noak suspected that Jake felt like that anyway. And yeah, he does, admittedly, still does obviously go rogue quite a lot, but in this case it actually kind of works out towards the end, because he follows his gut feeling. He gets Pycon and the other Tulkun from his clan that survived, and the Tulkun actually decide to fight back because of him, you know, when they go to the council. You know, he turns the tides of Entmoot, so to speak. So it works out, but the one thing I would have added to that scene, or maybe I would have done like after it, you know, when they've calmed down, they're going to talk to themselves properly, or maybe even at the end or something, because they haven't considered this one parallel, I suppose. You know, they have Jake and Quaritch, they have Neytiri and Ashtahik. You know, they have obviously still the continuing idea of Kiri versus Grace being a reincarnation and everything, Of course, of course. What they don't, what they haven't realized is there's a parallel between Jake and Noach that is apparent now, and as of Fire and Ash, they have both lost a brother. The whole reason that Jake went to Pandora in the first place is because his twin brother was shot, in his own words, for the paper in his wallet, right a week before he was going to ship off. And so, the administrators or whatever asked Jake, would you be willing to fill his shoes, because your genetic code is the same as his. And then there's obviously that moment where, he actually just very nonchalantly, cremates the body and everything. And he never really talked about Tom, which is his name, Tom Sully. Aside from just that he was the scientist, he was supposed to be here and all of that. It's mostly other people that mention, that mention him, like Grace saying, I don't need you, I need your brother, the PhD that trained for 3 years for this mission or something. He was compared to him a lot. And that could have also happened with Noah, because, the older brother was the one who was also, much more praised, much more by the books, and much more following along with the orders of Jake. And that's why Noah had such a chip on his shoulder to prove himself anyway. So, and yes, while Jake doesn't really attempt to prove himself for that sake, he's more so doing so because Quaritch actually promised him his legs originally. So he has entirely different motivations. But I always wondered, what was the relationship like between Jake and Tom? Because we never get that, it seems like they weren't that close based on the cremation scene. But, were they at some point? Were they close when they were younger, like let's say Noach's age, and then drifted apart because of different interests or, the ravages of time? There could have been something there of I get how you feel, I wish I was there to help him, or something along those lines, or, maybe because he was already injured by that point, maybe he was supposed to be there with him or something, or, if he feels like if he had his legs and he could still operate properly Marine style, then, he would, he would have been able to help him, to save him or push him out of the way, or, take the bullet himself, anything. But they missed that chance. And that would have been such a powerful moment between the two of them, one of them who feels responsible for what happened, and, another one who, felt powerless, most likely. Because, again, in the first movie, Jake's ascension was obviously very gradual. He goes from, he goes from a paraplegic Marine that no one believed him, and wasn't one in the science team, was looked down upon by the other, military people that he wasn't working with, again, except the person that he would have to eventually betray and became his greatest enemy. No wonder he allies with the Quaritch. He felt like he was the only person who was in his corner at the time. And even looking back, even Norm, who did actually, start off quite amiable to him, whenever I watched the movie, I realized that, yeah, he had a lot of spite for Jake being there in general, but most of that was montaged away because his attitude changed over time. So yeah, it might have also been because, working under Grace, and Grace praised him more, Thematic chose him, and, things start to look up for him, for Jake, I mean. So yeah, of course, Jake has been where Noach is right now, to one extent or another. Even the idea that, getting close to Neytiri, whether just as a teacher or as a friend, as a romantic interest or whatever happened, and the rest of Matakai looking down upon him until he was accepted, much like how Noach ended up bonding with the one Tulkun that was isolated, and also fell for the chief's daughter of a different tribe, Soraya. They really are mirrors of each other, and unfortunately that doesn't come across And I realize now that I'm running out of time. So I'll just say, in general, despite that one thing I mentioned, I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. I think it's probably my second favorite out of the bunch, the first favorite being the first one, and definitely an improvement over Way of Water. So if you're looking for a non-white savior focused story with more of a, you know, main character spread and several stories, not just one, that all combine together rather than a much more simple structure. If you want people to complain about the story in the first one, honestly, this might be the film for you. I'd talk about it more, but I haven't got the time, and I have an email to send and some food to eat. So please leave a like or dislike, because your opinion matters, and subscribe to us already. And on that note, until next time, I see you.